Hi, my name is Todd. I'm a grateful believer in Christ who really struggles with control, but my main addictions were alcohol, pornography, work addiction. So, hi. I'm going to try to get through this well. If you've been around recovery for a long time, every once in a while somebody shares and they have like rented space in your head, right? And that's just what's happened with me with Jen, because she like talked about so many things that were the same for me, right? Like parents, father is a police officer, right? And he raised us, my brother and I, and he constantly did abusive things, right, from the get-go. And like we would say, but we didn't do that, right? And my police officer father would be like, that punishment's for the one that I didn't catch you on, right? Very violent, a detective, always questioning us all the time. I had my mom, who is a survivor of sexual abuse herself, and did all the things that were the grooming behaviors that were done to her, to my brother and I. So a very dysfunctional house, where I had abuse on one side from my dad, who I can never be good enough for, and a mom who viewed me as essentially her husband and engaged with me in a way to be her emotional support. So consequently, like, without getting too deep into all the things that were there as far as my youth, I came to a spiritual disease that I like believed God was embodied by my father, right? I believed that God was just sitting there judging me all the time, and there was no hope for me at all. I came to a belief within myself that everything was always all Todd's fault. I was just miserable and depressed as I could possibly be from a young age, right? Parents got divorced, remarried, had another narcissistic, abusive stepmom to deal with as well. Just heaps and heaps of stuff. So by the time I was 14, I was just miserable beyond all belief, and that's when I started drinking. I found porn when I was 8, which really got me into recovery later on. But my first thing that I fell in love with was alcohol. I still remember it super vividly. First day of my freshman year of high school, running on the cross-country team. Friends are in a parking lot, and like I lived up against the mountain. This parking lot where all the mountain bikers would go up a mountain bike, and they held up beers and said, "Come drink with us," right? And I went and got drunk my first day of high school. And then from then on, it was like every time I had a Friday or Saturday off from work, I was driving around with my friends looking for people to buy us alcohol so we could drink, or trying to find out where the party was at so I could drink. And it became an obsession for most of the rest of my adult life, right? Well, it is still an obsession, right? I'm not a story where God removed the obsession to drink alcohol. I still have the obsession as much as I did the first day I stopped drinking, right? So I got sober 16 years ago, on July 18th, so it was like 2 days ago, right? It was my sobriety date. So super highly dysfunctional, right? Just addicted to work, working 60, 80, 100 hours a week, doing all kinds of crazy other behaviors to try to control how I felt, playing video games, working. I did a side thing where I did swing dancing, which is actually a little bit healthier for me, where I met my wife, and it was like still super addictive behavior, but it was around a bunch of other people. And so it ended up being something where, I gained a little bit of health. Met my wife. She discovers like a year after we're married that I'm addicted to porn. Can't stop looking at it no matter what. And then I remember it really vividly. October 14th, 2006 is when I was given the gift of desperation. I remember sitting outside of Celebrate Recovery in the dark in Fort Collins, Colorado, like some light snowflakes coming down, and just praying to God that something would be different, because I was so miserable and I just couldn't stop doing my behaviors. And I walked in there, and I was greeted for the first time with people who just love me for me in a way that I can never really understand. And it's been the same thing that's been happening to me now all the way to today. Whenever I come into a recovery room, I'm surrounded by people who love me just for me. And got there, got a Celebrate Recovery Bible, went through the 12 steps with them. Just couldn't stop looking at porn still. A little over a year later, I got busted by my wife again, and just hopeless as hopeless could be. And I went and met one of my friends. His name is Larry. Just dear, dear man, amazing man. And he sat me down and told me this long story about how he had forgiven some stuff. So, like, the reason why I was relapsing was because I was just so angry about the things that had been done to me as a child, right? I was just couldn't stop being angry and resentful about it. And I was like filled with so much rage and anger, I just kept on justifying my behaviors. And so Larry sets me down and he talks to me. And he tells me the story about how he forgave the person who murdered his daughter. And he went through the entire process of it. Showed me in his journal, like, hey, this is the first time I remember seeing the sun again. It was like a year later. And he told me the story about how he went down and went down to the support group that was in Denver for a group of people that had all lost their children in an accident from a bus driver when they were kindergartners. And his sponsor had taken him down there. And at the end of it, his sponsor said, like, do you notice, like, a bunch of the people looked like they were 70 and a bunch of the people looked like they were 50. And he's like, all the people who looked 50, that's their natural age. The people who all looked 70 are the same age, but they never forgave the people who harmed their kids. And we talked for a long time, and when I walked out of there, is the first time in my life I remember having hope. It wasn't very much hope. It was like, I think the way I described it to myself at the time was I kind of sort of think that maybe God might just do for me what he did for my friend Larry, right? But there's a bunch of more catches in there, right? There's like 30 of them more, right? That's how little hope I had there, and very tangential. And I walked out of there, and then I made this conditional promise to God, like, God, I'll forgive, like, primarily my dad at the time, for harming me, because I know you're going to judge him. Then 2 years later, I was teaching at Celebrate Recovery, and I'm teaching on the 8th step. And part of the Celebrate Recovery 8th step has, like, forgiving the people that harmed you as a child, is, like, rewritten for, like, the sufferers of childhood sexual abuse and childhood abuse, right? So then, like, God needles me, right? Like, how much have you forgiven your dad? And in that moment, everything changed for me. And it went from this conditional forgiveness to, on the day of judgment, when God calls me as a witness for my father, I'll stand up and say, he has nothing against me, right? And then it snowballs into everyone, right? So if I've forgiven the person who harmed me the most, and I'm going to forgive, like, him on the last day of judgment and live that way, and then I have to do it for everyone, right? And so then I catch myself, like, getting angry at traffic, people cut me off, like, why are you cutting me off? And I'll be like, why am I so angry at this person? Like, I'm going to forgive my dad this thing, right? Well, there. And they just kind of snowballed and affected the rest of my life. And it was just remarkable, right, to have this type of radical thing happen. As the first gift that God really gave me, that is something that I can go back to over and over and over again, right? Because people don't stop hurting me, right? I still have very broken parents that both have PTSD, both try to go back into their same behaviors they did with me when I was a child. and I still have to forgive them, right? Because it's not for them. It's for me to be free of the anger and resentment I would feel otherwise, and the like fuel I would use to do dumb, stupid things. So it's a radical way of being, right? Of forgiving people. And then I get to be different with them when I do that, right? They're both difficult, but I can actually love on them, sometimes from afar. They both live far away, and I don't see them very often, so I can have really high boundaries with them. But that frees me to be able to love them when I do talk to them. So I go from that right into a spiritual desert. Was working there in a sales position at an electronics store. And at the time, I was working with a guy who was really angry, right? And this goes right into step 5 and 6, right? My spiritual defects. So my first spiritual defect that I was worked on was being resentful, right? Second one we're working on now is being totally afraid of anybody who's angry. I'm like really, really afraid, right? Totally deer in the headlights, cannot move when somebody's yelling at me. Cannot move when they're angry with me. Want to like just change everything I do around them to make sure that I don't get angry. But I'm working for a boss who has no control, and there's no way to know what he's going to get angry at, right? I'm talking about a boss that will like get this far away from your face and yell at you. A boss who would like kick holes in walls and punch holes in walls, like slam doors so hard that they would get bent and they would have to come out and fix the door. Just crazy boss, right? And I would just do this, and it was this giant electronics store, like double the size of this room. I would just walk around the store praying all day long. Just the first 3-step prayer. God, I can't handle this guy. Please help me. I know you can't help me. I'm going to let you help me. And that's all I would do all day long, was do that for the 3-step prayer, right? Like, I'd work 12-hour shifts with them, right? And I would see him walking and doing this thing like this all the time, right? And I would just be like, can't handle it. And I just, every time I looked at him, he'd do the same thing. And I'm just like my entire day was spent trying to be on the opposite side of the place for him, right? Then like 3 years goes by, same boss, prayed every day. Every single day I prayed, I can't handle this, God. I need a different job, right? So I come into work, and he tells us to do this really unethical thing to lie to customers and just like totally lie. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to lie to customers. And he's like, are you calling me a liar? I'm like, no, I'm just not going to lie to customers. And it just went back and forth like that. And then he just like walked away, and everybody came up to me and was like, what was that? Right? And then a couple of days later, I come onto the floor, I see people at the back of the store, and go back to talk to them. And I am talking to them and making this, like, putting together a really big sale. And I come to him to, like, as I go up to check and see if stuff is in stock, he comes up to me and says, you didn't see the people there at the front of the store. If you're not going to be, like, going up and talking to them, go home right now, right? And sent me home, but I didn't go home because I was trying to make this big sale. And like half an hour later, after I put everything together and like come to him and say, like, I need you to approve this deal, he's like, why didn't you go home? I'm like, I don't know, just wanted to make a sale. He's like, that's the kind of attitude I want, right? Like complete insubordination of what I tell you to do is what I want, right? So God removes another defective character there, right? And then I'm just in a really big spiritual desert this entire time, right? And my pastor at the time talks about gratitude. My sponsor at the time talks about gratitude. I just start digging into gratitude, right? And then I start becoming grateful for the boss, because the boss is doing something good to me. He's making something good to me, right? I'm actually super grateful for him now. I tell this story all the time. Every time I tell it, I have to pray for him because I love him, right? Like, because he changed something within me. Even though it's crazy, I'm so grateful for that time in my life because I can deal with things now that I could not have dealt with before. You know, if my wife got mad at me, I would freeze, right? And then she would get really mad because I have this blank look on my face, and she's like, "Don't you care about anything?" I'd be like, "I totally care about it, but I'm so emotionally flooded I can't even speak right now," right? So that got taken away from me. Then we get moved to California, and I get put in a third spiritual desert. I got addicted to work, right? Work was a way of controlling things. And so, long period of time there, right? And super high-stress job, working for a technology company, like selling technology to crazy companies, all this stuff. But I was constantly afraid all the time about it. Finally master the sales stuff. I work really, really, really hard. I master the sales stuff. And then make a sale one year that just blows everything out of the water, right? Great sales, like such good sales that they're talking about it at the sales kickoff the next year, how much I sold to this company. More successful than I could ever have imagined being. And then God turned it to ash in my mouth. Could care less. My wife, we had like a 2.5-year-old at the time. He was a pretty difficult 2.5-year-old. Difficult, would demand food while I was cooking. And I had to look at him and in the most cruel way I could possibly say, "I will not have food for you for 30 minutes. Go sit down." As cruel as I could possibly be. And that would give me about 3 minutes before he came and asked for food again, right? And he couldn't sleep through the night. And the only way he would not scream was if I took him on a walk. So I'd be walking sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning for an hour every day for 3.5, 4 years. So just at the end of my rope. Should have been more happy than I could have possibly imagined, right? So I went and had all these super fantastic sales. Success by the world standards beyond any measure. And I was more miserable than I've ever been. Right? More miserable because I was sitting here I had to go to my work and say "Hey, I think I'm going to have to do FMLA because this isn't working. Everything is too bad. My wife is too depressed. We cannot do what we're doing right now." And then I ended up losing that job because I asked for FMLA. And sales, God kept me in it for years afterward, another 5 years after that. But in that time frame, he taught me how to rely on him instead of relying on myself. A couple years into it, I made this really great believer friend. His name was Logan. And we'd have to do these quarterly business reviews. And we'd have to have these super complex things this is what we're all going to do for the next 3 months. I'd say, "Okay, we're going to do this, but our real plan is we're just going to rely on God to give it to us because that's the only thing that works," right? And it had this beautiful thing. So the third gift in this process he gave me, it's the absence of fear in the future, the assurance that everything is going to be okay. So going back to the beginning of this piece, right? My concept of God was my dad. And an abusive, terrible God, right? And we go back to the beginning of this, and I have come to believe what I believe now, that my problem is a spiritual disease, right? My spiritual disease that I suffer from is I believe anything will make me okay besides God, right? I believe alcohol will. I believe success at work will. I believe pornography will. I believe food will. I believe swing dancing, rock climbing, any of these things, right, will fill the hole in my heart. But it's a God-sized hole in my heart. I have to have God in that God-sized hole. Nothing else is going to fill it. And going back to the beginning of my first sponsor, he taught me that my problem was I was confused of the character of God versus the character of my dad. Because my conception of God was that God was a big police officer in the sky just waiting to bust Todd and harm Todd. But that's not who God is, right? God is a loving, kind, amazing God that brings us to places that we can only hope for. Let me pull this up really quick. So, and this is the scripture here that to me describes recovery, describes what we do in these rooms. And it's 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 5 from the Message version of the Bible. It's called The Rescue. All praise to God the Father of our Master, Jesus the Messiah, Father of all mercy, God of all healing counsel. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who's going through hard times so that we can be there for that person, just as God was there for us. We have plenty of hard times that come from following the Messiah, but no more so than the good times of his healing comfort. We get a full measure of that too. And now I realize in my spiritual condition that that's what God does. He does it all the time, right? And for those of you who are getting close enough to be able to have a sponsees, you know, the awesomest thing's going to happen to you, right? You're going to have a sponsee that thinks just like you did. All my sponsees do. They all have thought exactly like me, right? And let's see, the things, the ways I talk about. Like, so I have a sponsee in California. His name's Dell. I've shared this story a lot, so he's good with me sharing with him. So Dell, when I first meet him as another sales guy, I meet him at a bar because that's where I have to meet all the salespeople that I worked with my big sales job company, right? So I'd always have to go to these bars, always have to go to these happy hours. I'm drinking lemonade. He looks at me drinking a lemonade as like, I don't trust anybody who doesn't drink, right? And I'm like, well, you know, I don't drink because I do stupid things. He's like, what do you mean you do stupid things? Well, like I end up in a different state. He was like, what do you mean you end up in a different state? I'm like, well, I start drinking in one state, and then I wake up in an entirely different one. But this isn't a state like here in Delaware where you can like go to a different state walking 10 minutes away from my house. This is in Colorado, in Denver, and I woke up in Wyoming in a city 8 hours away. Right? No idea how I got there. Wearing completely different clothes that I had like blacked out in, right? And like trying to piece together in the night. Nobody has any clue, like what happened anywhere, right? So this is the types of things that happen with me. Oh yeah, like I kept the shirt because I woke up not in a normal shirt, but in this like I don't know, velvet velour blue shirt that had like giant butterfly collars on it. It was ridiculous, right? So anyway, so I talked to him, right? And I talked to him, and like once every 6 months he calls me because he's like miserable and comes to like, dude, I just want to have what you have, right? And that goes on for 6 years. And then he calls me up one day after he'd gone to rehab, went back out right after he got out of rehab, and he calls me and he's like, dude, I just don't know what the problem is. And I'm like, well, you just think that you can handle it, right? You don't think you have a problem. I just like lay it out for him, and then he doesn't call me for 30 days. Right? Then he calls me like 31 days later, and he's like, dude, I'm sober. I got it this time. His neighbors took him into a recovery center that day. Then he becomes my sponsee. And Tell believes the earth is flat. Yeah, right. And was atheist with a dog named Darwin. Right? And so I had to pray like every day, like, how do I reach Dell? Right? And God's answer to me was just like God, right? He's like, well, Dell trusts the world as much as you should, Todd. You shouldn't trust the world at all. Why are you trusting the world so much? Like, you should trust the world as little as he does. And just tell him the truth. The only truth that there is me. Tell him about me. So that's what I did, right? Now he's agnostic, sends me texts like, with evil like this going on in the world, there has to be a God, right? He's been sober like 6 years now, 7 years now. I think it'll be 7 years in October. And he has an entirely different life, right? The reason why I'm talking about Dell is reflection of me, right? Who I am, right? Because when I was first in recovery, I came into a recovery meeting just mad as I could possibly be. And my sponsor takes me aside and is like, all right, Todd, like 98% of the time when you're mad, it's because you're afraid of something. What are you afraid of? Right? And I was mad at my wife for doing something, right? And it was like just completely self-righteous about it. And then my sponsor just like does some weird Jedi mind trick and makes me realize it's all about me, not about my wife, right? And spends an hour with me until I can like communicate what I'm actually afraid of. And Dell calls me like 60 days sober. He's like, I'm leaving my wife. And I'm like, no, you're not. What's going on? Why? Stop packing your bags. You're going to go drink if you get to the hotel room. What's going on? And then we talk for like an hour, and we figure out what he's afraid of, right? And that just happens to me over and over and over again. And if I have somebody who asks me to be a sponsor, it's always because they're me, right? Because it's like they're saying stuff that's mine. I'm like I can't even tell sometimes. I'm like, oh, man, you're talking like me. That's not a good sign. So I'm 16 years sober now, right? And there's different stages in everybody's walk, right? You got 1 to 2 years. Can be a little bit of a pink cloud. Depends on when God that removes that from you, right? I never had that. Like my actual sobriety, like my stuff is all turned around. Like I never had the desire for alcohol removed from me, right? 5 years in, you're going to have a desert, right? You're really going to have to work. 10 years in, probably going to happen the same thing. 15 years in, probably going to happen again, right? Because God just keeps on working on us, right? There keeps on being things that we have to deal with to be okay, right? Because I still want to control everything, right? I still want everything to be my way. I have spent in the past 15 years probably, I can't even calculate the number of hours, over 10,000, meditating on just one part of the Serenity Prayer. Take it as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Because that's my primary thing, right? That is my spiritual disease. I want the world to be Todd's way, not God's way. And then I have to meditate on it again. And then it'll be okay. Because this miraculous thing happens to me every single time I take my stuff back into my own control. I become miserable, irritable, and discontent, despairing of all things within hours of trying to do it on my own again. It's not something that happens to me very long. It doesn't take very long at all. So then I get to have the miraculous thing of doing the first 3-step prayers again, right? God, I can't handle this. I know you can, so I'm going to let you. And that's really what this program has been for me, is the steps 4 through 12 are about keeping the wreckage out of my life so I can adequately do the first 3. Because I'm really bad at doing the first 3. Really bad at it. I have to do it a lot. So I went from 10,000 times a day having to say that prayer to just a couple hundred times a day now, right? So I can make it 5 minutes without having to say it, which is maybe 5 minutes, sometimes 10. Depends on how long I have to talk to my wife, right? Because I tend to want to control things when I'm talking with her, because I can just see the solution, right? If you just do things my way, everything will be okay. So I'm going to close with this. So I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. My 10-year-old son is going into do a day camp this summer at University of Delaware. As part of the onboarding for doing the day camp, He had to answer questions about abuse in the house, right? And he starts telling my wife stuff. It was like, well, it's like when you get yelled at and this stuff. And my wife had to be like, well, no, this is what abuse is, right? And she had to list the stuff and describe it to like a 10-year-old. I burst into tears when she told me that story, right? Because for me, that's like I succeeded because my son doesn't know what abuse is, right? Has no clue what it is. I was able to break the generational curse and give my children something that's different. So, well, I don't think it was me. God did it, right? But I did it by just following after God one day at a time, one moment at a time, and trying the best I can to own my stuff. And having a sponsor, right? Call my sponsor all the time. His sponsor has a sponsor. And my sponsor's, you know, he's talked me down off the ledge when I've been really mad more than once, right? But it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to come to this program and be able to change the generational curses that we grew up with so our children can be free of things that we've seen and heard. So thank you very much.